All right. So just tell me your name and what do you do?
So my name is Carl S. Richie Jr. I'm a lawyer and I have my own firm, Carl S. Richie Jr., attorney at law. And I practice law. My practice is primarily administrative litigation and legislative representation, and I do some strategic counseling with nonprofit organizations.
And what does that mean?
So I advise them on governance issues related to board members, their bylaws, their constitution, articles of incorporation, and then also governance issues on ethics, things that a board member should do and they shouldn't do, how to make sure that a board member is not micromanaging their either executive director or the president of their association. Because as a board member, your role is to set policy as opposed to making personnel decisions. And usually when organizations get in trouble, it's because the board has crossed that line from being a policymaker to being a micromanager.
So where were you born and raised?
So I was born in Wichita Falls, Texas, and I was raised there. I attended high school there, graduated. From there, I went on to attend college at a school called East Texas State University, which is now known as Texas A&M at Commerce. Graduated with a BA and BS in psychology and sociology. And from there, I went on to attend Texas Southern University, where I got a master's degree in public administration. And that school is now called the Barbara Jordan Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs. And then after about 2 years, I was convinced to go back to school. And so I went across the street and I went to the University of Houston Law Center and graduated and earned a degree in law.
Okay. So tell me about growing up in Wichita Falls, because I remember when I first was looking at doing television, I got offered a job down there and it was like really small, right? It's a small town. So what was life like growing up?
So Wichita Falls is a small city. I was fortunate to be in a community that was a close-knit community where people really cared and looked out for each other. I was born to two very beautiful parents. My mother was a public school teacher. She had a master's degree. My dad was a sergeant in the Air Force. They met, fell in love, built this beautiful house. It had hardwood floors. I'll never forget that our house was probably one of the few houses that actually had a game room for the kids. And so we had an outdoor cement patio. So it was a really beautiful house, and it was on a corner lot that enters into a public park. So after being married several years, my parents decided they wanted to have a family. So my mom gave birth to me, and then about 15 months later, she gave birth to my sister. And everything looked great in the Richie household. However, my mother was like a number of women in this country. 1 out of every 7 women who give birth goes into postpartum depression. From that, it's in some cases it becomes a state of manic depression. And in the very worst cases, it becomes what they call postpartum psychosis, or what you and I would commonly know as schizophrenia. So my mom developed schizophrenia, and my dad, being in the Air Force, didn't understand what was going on. My parents divorced shortly thereafter, but my mom was trying to figure out how she was going to make it, raising 2 kids under the age of 4, dealing with an illness that she didn't know anything about, and most people didn't know how to deal with, and then keeping and still working. And she worked for a number of years, teaching to the point where she couldn't, and then she would substitute. And then we kind of bounced around from different cities, but we eventually came back to Wichita Falls, where my parents had bought this house. My grandmother had maintained it for us while we were gone, but we moved back into that house. And fortunately, like I said again, we had a very loving community. When my mother would have episodes, there was always people in the community there who would help us. I never forget on one occasion when both my mother and grandmother were both hospitalized my mother was institutionalized, but my grandmother had some medical issues. But the church stepped up to take us in because the judge who had committed my mom had called my grandmother's hospital room to tell her that they were going to put us in foster care. Fortunately, my Sunday school teacher was there and answered the phone and told the judge he had lost his ever-loving mind. And then after she did that, she called one of our church members, a lady named Charlie Ola Farris. Charlie Ola was the first female admitted to the Texas bar in Texas, and Charlie Ola Her office was directly across the street from the courthouse. She ran to the judge's chamber to apologize for Louise's language, but reassured the judge that she would take care of us and make sure the church would take care of us until my grandmother got out of the hospital. Things worked out. Unfortunately, my mom was not able to work and maintain the maintenance on the house and the upkeep. So we ended up losing our house, but we moved into public housing. The public housing authority there gave my mother a 3-bedroom house and gave my grandmother a unit in 2 buildings down from where we are, so to try to keep the family unit together. My sister and I both went on. We graduated from high school. We both went on and graduated from college. I went to graduate school. I told my sister she took the easy way out. She got married. She married an anesthesiologist.
Oh my gosh.
And then I went on to graduate school and then went on to law school. But growing up in Wichita Falls, because of the community and also because of the church, that made all the difference in the world with us, with me and my sister being able to overcome the odds that we faced. I'm glad that we didn't end up in foster care, although I know some kids do really well with it and other kids don't fare as well. But I'm thankful that the good Lord looked out for us and blessed us with a strong church community, a strong community in general that was very loving, compassionate, and I always thought and promoted, my sister and I always believed that we can go on and do great things.
Did you always know you were going to go to college?
I always knew I was going to college because my mom was, given that she was a school teacher, at a very young age doing the summers. Some people would call it tutoring, others may call it homeschooling. But Wichita Falls is in a kind of interesting area. In the summer, it gets as hot as any place in the world. And in the winter, it gets as cold as any place in the world. So during the summers, when it was really, really hot, my mom, being the school teacher she was, always had my sister and I reading books, doing math, drawing, as if we were still in school. And so for me, it was never about whether I was going to go to college. It was where was I going to college. And then also, when I was in middle school, in our church, I grew up in the CME church. And so we had our colleges, Texas College, which is in Tyler, and every summer they have what's called leadership training school, or fancy word for saying Bible school. So every summer for a week, all the kids in the CME church, we would all come to Tyler and meet. And the great thing about it was, 1 year on a college campus, you get to see some of the college kids who were taking classes. But I made friends, and some of the friends I made, actually, when I got to East Texas State, I saw them there. So I felt like when I was in college, I was back at home. They were people who I knew, had seen for several summers, do leadership training school, and so we were friends. We hung out because I remember when I hung out with most of the kids from Houston when I went to leadership training school. So a lot of the kids thought I was from Houston. And so when I got to college, people thought I was from Houston. I was like, no, I'm from Wichita Falls. So, but it was fun. I really enjoyed it. So in terms of did I know, I always knew I was going to college. And my mom reiterated that to me. My grandmother and her friends reiterated to me. They always said, I think back then there was this cliche saying that you're the future leader of tomorrow. So they always instilled in me that I was going to be a leader. My mom always said that I was special and that I was going to lead someday. And so for me, I always knew I was going to do that. And then fortunately, my father, after he got out the military, he went back to school. He got his college degree, got a master's degree, started working on a PhD, and then he got hired. He got a big job in Virginia. He was the assistant superintendent of the correction system there, and then left there after a few years, and then went to the DC, and he was in their administrator in their correction system there. But so by the time I got to high school, I would spend at least a couple of weeks in DC. So it gave me an opportunity to see Black professionals in a light that I had never seen before. And my father always talked about, you're going to college, you need to figure out where you want to go. And, he would always throw in, how are you going to pay for it? But so for me, college was always in my plans. And and I really enjoyed college.
We talked about college. So when did you know you wanted to be a lawyer?
When I was in college, my senior year, my roommate was a pre-law major, and we talked a little bit about it. And I was thinking about it when I was in college. I was trying to figure out what I really wanted to do. I first started out, thought I was going to be a child psychologist, and that's why I majored in psychology and sociology. My sophomore year, I pledged Kappa Alpha Psi.
Oh, wow.
But I had a 7 a.m. lab with 6-year-olds. And after
Ooh.
being up all night,
With the Kappa wife. Oh my
I
God.
decided,
That
just
is
trying to,
not work.
it just didn't work out. So I was like, I don't think I want to do this. And so I thought I would try to be a sociologist. My father told me, he said, no, sociologists are a dime a dozen. Do something else. And he could see in me, I had this interest in social justice. I like politics. And so he talked to me about public administration, which he said would be a good fit for me. East Texas State didn't have a public administration program, so I decided to go ahead, had enough credits, graduate sociology, psychology, and then when I went to graduate school, I was looking at a joint program for public administration and law. And I got accepted into various colleges, but I also had an opportunity to go to DC and work for a little while. And I did that for about 4 months, which was actually the summer and then going into the fall. Unfortunately, my grandmother passed away in December, and so I came back to Texas to bury her. And while I was here, my father said, you really ought to give some consideration on getting into school now, before you mess up, before you start creating bills and creating debt and you can't go back to school. So of all the schools I was accepted to, Texas Southern was the only one that would allow me to come to school in the middle of the academic year. So I ended up there, and I was happy there. Texas Southern was on my list because my mother had attended Texas Southern, and so I enjoyed it, and I had several professors who were father-like figures who really sort of took me under their wings. Because initially I was thinking about transferring and going to a couple other schools that were a lot larger. But one of my professors came to me and said, if you stay here in the fall, we'll have a fellowship for you. And I had no idea what a fellowship was. And he said, essentially, we'll pay you to go to school. You'll pay for your books, your tuition, and we'll give you a living stipend. And your only responsibility is to go to class and to study, and you can't work. And so that worked out perfectly. So I enjoyed it. So for me, it was just perfect. I enjoyed the university. I enjoyed the challenge. I enjoyed what I was learning, met a lot of friends. And then in just the environment of being in Houston at Texas Southern, you're at HBCU, so there's always something going on, something fun going on. And then I had the benefit of having friends who were attending the University of Houston, which was directly across the street. And I'm a big sports fan, so I loved it because at the time we had, Texas Southern, we had to go to football games. You see the Ocean of Soul. And then I got to see a lot of great players come through there. Right. Jerry Rice played for Mississippi Valley State. And I got to see other players. And then basketball season, I got to see Phi Slama Jama, Clyde Drexler, and Elijah Wan back when they were in their college days. And then afterwards, after basketball, then it's track season, and then Carl Lewis.
Oh, wow.
To watch him run at the TSU relays and at the track meets at the University of Houston.
Wow.
And then we roll around back to the fall, and the Oilers picked up Warren Moon. So my buddies and I, we had kind of a regimen where on Sundays we would go to church at 7:45, be out by 9:15, go have brunch, and then we would be in the Astronome watching Warren Moon throw touchdowns.
Whoa.
So I enjoyed and loved being in Houston, and then I was fortunate enough to get an internship through the Congressional Black Caucus. Went to Washington and worked on the Hill for a semester and worked for a guy named Barney Frank, who was the chairman of a subcommittee on manpower and housing. Ironically, that subcommittee had oversight over HUD, which oversees public housing. Wow. So I got a chance to learn about public housing, although I had lived in it, but get to learn about the regulations and legislations, and then just to see the dynamics of the political arena. And then after my internship was over with, one of the friends I developed on Capitol Hill was a guy named Rodney Ellis. Rodney was a chief of staff for Mickey Leland. Rodney came back to Houston and ran for the city council. I volunteered to work on his campaign. And when Rodney got elected, then I went to City Hall with Rodney.
Wow.
And that was sort of my foray into the political arena. And then when I was there, Rodney was a lawyer, and Rodney, after years, said, "You need to go to law school. You really need to go to law school." And I was thinking about it, and Rodney was doing a press conference on some initiative that we were talking about. And a friend of mine who was a reporter came up to me afterwards, and she said, "Carl," she said, Rodney potentially could be the first black mayor. But what if he runs and he loses? What are you going to do?
Wow.
And I remember telling Lynn, I said, Lynn, I got a master's degree in public administration. I'll go work in that city department. She said, "I don't see you running and running the city department or being a bureaucrat. That's just not who you are." And so that got me to thinking about going to law school. So fortunately, U of H, University of Houston, had a night program. So I worked during the day, went to law school at night, did that for about a year and a half, and then transferred into the day program so I could accelerate and get out of college, get out of school faster. Because the U of H program was year-round for 4 years. And that was a pretty tough, so you really didn't have a break in between semesters. But I was able to graduate. The folks at U of H were surprised that I actually finished. Not because I wasn't a good academic student, but I actually took 2 leaves of absence while I was in law school. The first time was Lieutenant Governor Bill Hobby, who had presided over the Senate for a number of years, was thinking about running for governor. So his last re-election campaign, he asked me would I join his campaign. So I took a leave of absence from law school to go join the campaign. It was a way of developing a relationship with somebody who potentially could become governor. And then later on, my last semester of law school, Senator Lloyd Benson was selected by Michael Dukakis to be the vice presidential nominee for the Democratic ticket. And the Benson folks asked me, would I have an interest in joining the presidential campaign? So I took another leave, but I still graduated in 4 years. Which led me to, when I got ready to graduate, I had a number of folks approach me about working on political campaigns. And so I worked for Governor Bullock. Back then he was a comptroller for a little while. And then Ann Richards, who was running for governor, asked me to join her campaign right before the primary started. And I joined her campaign and ran the Houston operation. And so when she got elected, she asked me to come to Austin, and I was her deputy chief of staff.
That was insane. I did not know all of this. That's crazy. What year did you come to Austin?
So I moved to Austin literally in '89.
Wow.
And I was going back and forth between Austin and Houston. And then when she got elected, so in January of '91, I officially moved to Austin.
So now I know why Bill Jones and Demetrius told me I needed to talk to you. It's great. It's great. Great. Oh my God, this is insane. It's awesome. So what do you think was different about you? Because you were saying you